that made it feel like it was a very large family. And working with a family where you know that you're
I
appreciated
can
and that you can
see,
contribute something along with
I
everybody
can
else,
see
it just,
me.
for me,
I'll be the
it was an
eyes so
excellent
that I
fit.
just can be.
This is another episode of a special series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. This series sheds light on 75 years of an NGO called CWS. My name is Maurice Bloem and I welcome you to another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the special series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen, during which we talk about an organization called Church World Service. Today, actually, as always, I have a great guest today who will introduce himself. Bill, please go ahead.
Good morning, Maurice. My name is Bill Sage, and I have spent about 25 years working with CWS in many different facets and programs. But initially, I came to know CWS back in 1975 when I sponsored a refugee family in Richmond, California. And the sponsoring agency was CWS. So I had an opportunity to be in touch with the New York office, but also with their affiliate, which was located in Oakland. So that's how I initially met and came to recognize Church World Service. And thereafter, in 1982, I joined the affiliate office there in Oakland, and I was there for about a year. And Church World Service then asked me if I would go to work with CASA in New Delhi, India, which is the church's auxiliary for social action. So I was there working with them on some of their emergency drought programs and helping them close out some old programs and open some new ones. And then I returned in 1985 to the New York office. And there is where I remained for quite a long time, many years. I was with the Division of Overseas Ministries first, the Southern Asia office, and then I moved over to the Immigration and Refugee Program for most of the years until sort of the closing years of my experience with Church World Service, which was after September 11 and the formation of the interfaith response team, which we worked around the tri-state area from 2001 until the hurricanes in Florida came in the fall of 2004. And we then took our training and workshop programs to the Gulf Coast, and we finished there in 2006. So my experience has been varied, but I think two things which were very important to me during these many years and experiences. And I think one is I was very proud that Church World Service was able to open up the refugee processing for African refugees starting in 1993. We opened an office in Nairobi and later in Dakar. And it was the beginning of recognition that there are African refugees, and Church World Service took the lead on that. I think the second most important, they're all important, but I think the one that really stands out the most in terms of detail was our response after September 11, with the Interfaith Trauma Response Team. That particular initiative started, I guess, on the same day as September 11. After I'd seen the two attacks on TV, I tried to get in touch with Rick Augsburger, who was then the director of the emergency response program at CWS. And he was in New Mexico at the committee meeting. I spoke with him, and they were trying to figure out how to get back to New York, and finally ended up renting an Avis vehicle. And it took them 3 days and 2 nights to get back here. But when he returned, he and I met mostly by phone for a couple of weeks because they had set up their operations in New Windsor at that time. Um, we were not sure that there weren't going to be more attacks, so everyone was being very cautious. And so they set up their operations in New Windsor, and he and I were in touch back and forth. One of the things we did early on in recognition of how we might be able to respond beyond the material response, and we did donate a lot of blankets to the first responders working down around ground zero. That happened probably on the 12th and 13th of September. But Rick and I talked about this, and we decided that we would have someone come from Oklahoma City. She was a consulting psychologist by the name of Dr. Katrina uh, Cochran. Actually, it was Katrina Bright at that time. She subsequently married during the time that we were working together. In any case, her experience of working in 1995 after the MUR bombing in Oklahoma City led her to have a lot of experience about how to deal with the trauma, particularly with first responders, with the communities, with the churches who had individuals who were lost during that attack in Oklahoma City. And also because it was considered to be a crime scene, the way to deal with that kind of a situation was much different than, say, responding to a situation where there may have been a great deal of material and possibly human loss, say in a flood or tornado. The context was very different because the event of September 11 was considered a crime scene. So Katrina came out to New York on the 22nd of September, and Rick had authorized me to set up operations at the Southgate Hotel, which is across from Penn Station here in New York City. And we set up the first meeting, the kind of planning meeting, and we had an interfaith meeting in the sense that some of our colleagues from the highest, the Hebrew Immigrant and Migration Agency, joined us along with the Mennonite professors from the Eastern Mennonite University. And we sat around the table and did planning, and we organized how we were going to approach this, and we held the first workshop of any agency in New York City on October 22nd.
Thanks, Bill. I just want to ask you, because when I'm listening to you, and you had experience at that time already of working in, a country like India, for example, we had worked on our immigration and refugee program as well. So, and I heard you say, this situation that we experienced was different than after a flood or after a hurricane. I would like to, can I ask you, what were some of so to elaborate a little bit more on how was that different, that particular situation? Yes, it was in the US as well, which I think was different. But also, the experiences that you had so far in working in other countries on different topics, how was that useful for you and for CWS as an organization to respond effectively to 9/11 or the post 9/11 activities?
So prior to September 11, having worked overseas in Thailand during the refugee crisis beginning in '75, and then in India, there was a great crisis at the time that Indira Gandhi was assassinated. There was a great deal of trauma at that time and loss of life. Many emergencies that I had been a part of in the past um, led me to part of the experience, I think, more in organizing an activity of response because I'm not a psychologist. Although Rick insisted over time that I do take the courses at the critical incident training in Baltimore. I'm not a psychologist, but I am a good organizer. And I think that particular skill is the one that I brought to the 9/11 experience because what I recognized was on our first workshop, where we had a very large attendance on October 26th, we then were able to make contact with those clergy and chaplains and different interfaith groups to host the trainings and workshops around the areas in their churches or in their synagogues, wherever we were able to work with them to organize this. We also did the workshops in Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic because we had a large Arabic population in Brooklyn. All of these were communities that were affected.
I heard you say that you're not a psychologist. So what was your background, or what is your background, Bill? What did you bring? Were you, what were your training? I think the listeners would be interested to hear that.
Well, I'm a graduate of Arizona State University, and my studies were in specialization on Latin American area studies. And I had hoped to work in Latin America when I graduated in 1968. Unfortunately, I was not able to find any kind of opportunity at that time because of the ongoing war in Indochina. However, the opportunity presented to me to go with International Voluntary Services. So I went to Laos in 1969, and for 6 years I was there. That was actually my first overseas experience. And of course, there were a lot of emergencies there during the war, both with refugees and communities that we now know and call displaced persons, displaced communities. So that experience came along the way, and then in 1977, I was the head of the refugee program in Bangkok, working with the embassy there and the refugee program. I was working for IRC at the time, but that whole next 4 years were a different experience. But again, mostly around organizing, which is what I like to do, and probably what I do a little bit better. But as I said, I'm not a psychologist, but a lot of things in the process of organizing, you just begin to understand better ways of handling and working, particularly with people in different cultures, different language, different contexts, backgrounds, economic status, and so on.
Thank you for sharing that. And so, going back then, jumping forward again to the situation after 9/11. So you and CWS and Mennonites and who else, started to organize these, trainings. And yeah, so can you elaborate a little bit on that? And what do you think were how did that play out in terms of giving the support that was needed at that time?
We held these planning meetings to try to organize what we thought, uh, particularly based on the experience that Dr. Katrina Bright brought from her experience in Oklahoma City. And then after the organizing the material, because we had handouts, we had to think about the materials that we wanted to share with people. And we also thought about language because we recognized that, below Canal Street, there were many communities, particularly Chinese, but also across in Brooklyn, Arabic communities. Uh, so we recognized that language is an important thing too. So in the process of organizing this, we had a chance, you know, in the first workshop to ask people that were attending. We had them fill out a form that gave their name and their background, if they were a chaplain, a minister, bereavement counselor, were they a superintendent of one of the church schools in New York City, or were they with a social service agency like the Lutherans or the Catholics. By talking with them initially in the first workshop, we came to recognize what would be the most helpful content because we asked them, what is it that you would like to get out of this workshop or presentation? What would you like to take away from this? And that gave us the idea of what should be the content as we went forward until we finished up, particularly around the New York City area in 2004. And I think it was June of 2004. But then the hurricanes came in Florida, and we took the uh, ITRT down to Florida at Rick's request. And the first one there was on the October 14th.
Can you explain what ITRT stands for?
Yes, ITRT is the Interfaith Trauma Response Team. We wanted to work interfaith, and we did. We had attendees who were rabbis. We had social service from the highest organization. We had some imams who attended, particularly in New Jersey. So it was interfaith. Any religion could attend, and it was to help them understand trauma, particularly how to deal with their congregations and the people that they work with, particularly the ones that had lost considerable numbers in 9/11. We had one pastor who came from New Jersey. They lost 40 individuals in their congregation. And that was a very traumatic situation for that pastor to deal with. So trying to help them understand that there are other groups that they could connect with for help, that sometimes it's not just one individual that can handle such an overwhelming uh, grief situation. What I would say about what happened in Florida and then subsequently along the Gulf Coast is that we put not only the emphasis on the spiritual and emotional care that they needed to impart on their congregations, working their congregations, but we put a lot of emphasis on self-care because many of these pastors and chaplains, social service agencies, even we had some people from FEMA or the state governments who attended, and the self-care was so important because people were that attended would tell us how they were spending hours and hours trying to respond to their congregations because of the overwhelming loss, overwhelming material loss that communities had suffered at that time. And then, of course, Hurricane Katrina came, and so we finished up in 2006, but the difference between ITRT implementation around New York and the tri-state area and the response after the hurricanes in Florida and the Gulf Coast was that we put a lot of emphasis on self-care. You got to take care of yourself first because you can't take care of anybody else very well if you don't do it for yourself first. And you're setting an example as well. One thing that I think everyone, certainly I learned, I think a lot of people that we worked with also would agree with, and that is there's a big difference when we go in, and for example, Church World Service goes in to work with communities that have been impacted or seriously affected by natural disasters, or even a mass situation, mass loss of life, such as Combine. And that is perhaps governmental agencies or quasi-governmental agencies like FEMA or something, they all have a time expiration date. And churches don't have an expiration date. They're there to continue working with the community for as long as they can or need to be working with, because they're providing not only the spiritual and emotional care for the community, but they're oftentimes very good advocates to particularly with the governmental agencies, in pointing out where there are lapses or shortcomings in resources for communities. The church leaders are great advocates in that area. That's a very big strength. And I would say that during these years, from September 11 until we closed in 2006, I think we had every church world service denomination, one of their clergy, their chaplains, who attended one of these workshops. We did 102 of them from that period of September 11 until we closed in 2006.
Thanks, Bill. I mean, when I listen to you, what you are saying is that in the work of Church World Service, working with communities is extremely important. You know, connecting these communities to further, to get into a situation that they can start a recovery. That we work for everybody. I think that's what I hear when I listen to you in terms of, interfaith approaches. But also that CWS has been an organization that doesn't go in and out, but stays there as long as that is necessary. I would like to ask you, could you maybe share an anecdote or an experience, what best describes your time with CWS? And it doesn't have to be related to 9/11, can also be about your time in India. If you could try to recollect, that would be great.
I think during the time that I worked in the variety of programs, whether it was with Church World Service or with some of our ecumenical partners overseas, like CASA, or some of the refugee agencies in Africa, ecumenical groups, I found that it was it was an approach that was always hopeful. And I always felt like the people that we worked with, whether they were staff or executives in Church World Service, or whether they were in our crop offices, or wherever Church World Service had their CWS plaque hanging out, these were really good people who were very committed to helping people in whatever way they possibly could. Very good people. And I found that as well with many of our ecumenical partners too. So it was a nice link that made it feel like it was a very large family. And working with a family where you know that you're appreciated and that you can contribute something along with everybody else. For me, it was an excellent fit. And I always felt affirmed by the people that I worked with, whether it was in the Division of Overseas Ministries or in the Immigration and Refugee Program with the committee members. wherever I worked with any of the CWS staff or even some of the committee members of CWS, I always felt affirmed, and I always felt like I was a part of a of a large family.
Let me piggyback a little bit on that. If you have to name one colleague, an ex-colleague or a partner or a supporter or a board member of CWS who best embodies of what CWS is about, who will you name and why?
Mm. Past or present?
Up to you. Can be past or present. Yeah.
Well, I think probably the person that I oftentimes think of for helping me understand the ecumenical approach to things was Reverend Lonnie Turnipseed, who was the head of the Division of Overseas Ministries Southern Asia office. I came to know him before I went out to India, and then even though I related to him during the time that I was in India, and he was still at CWS when I moved over to the IRP in 1986. He was a real inspiration for me, and he used to come to India to visit, and we always had long, long talks. I learned a lot from him. This was a man who was probably the most sincere and committed uh, person I've met, and he taught me many things. One of them that he taught me, and I still use today, and it seems even more appropriate today given the context of our uh, COVID emergency, and that is, he used to say, try to do one thing every day that makes a difference and that is good. Doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be splashy, but just do one thing that is good. Say good morning to somebody that you don't normally say good morning to, or help somebody with their groceries, or let that car that's trying to cut in front of you, let them cut in. It's okay. Just do something that is kind, at least one thing a day. And I always remember that. But also, he was very good at giving me a lot of inspiration about how to work interfaith wise, because I had not done that prior to coming to work with him when I was at the Division of Overseas Ministries.
Is there, um, except for Augsburg, yeah, is there anybody else?
There are so many. No, but
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
working with Rick also, but in a different way. Rick was also excellent to work with because he was such an affirming person, and he was open to ideas and ways of doing things that perhaps were different. And he just he was always supportive. You could always count on him. Uh, and that was my experience for the many years that I worked with him.
Mhm.
And of course, when he left, CWS, I continued to work with him on some other projects. But yes, he was an excellent person. He and Lonnie. Dr. Elizabeth Ferris, I have a great deal of respect for. Um, her academic accomplishments, her commitment to refugees and displaced persons is just incredible. So those are two, but I could go on with many, and I think that there have been many, many good people that I have worked with. Some of them are no longer with us, and have gone ahead. And there are some that are still with us who I sometimes have contact with because I met her originally when she was at WCC, the World Council of Churches. So I knew her quite a long time before she came to be the IRP director. And I was so happy when she came to IRP. Uh, it was just an excellent choice.
Yeah. You know that she's on our board now, so she's back with us.
Yes,
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would like to say, you would like to wish for the organization?
Well, I'm aware of 25 years of the 75 from my experience, and I have seen nothing but good works and responses to so many communities, both in responding to disasters and emergencies and catastrophic events, but also just promoting issues-oriented, such as landmines, which was something that was uh, a big issue when I was there. Also, development issues, food security, development issues, child protection issues, and so on. Many, many issues. So it's not just the catastrophic events that CWS has responded to, but in my 25 years, that's what I have observed and experienced. But I know that they did it 50 years before I came along, so I know that they have a lot of experience and they've done many good things. I hope, I very much hope, with the greatest sincerity, that they are able to continue on for more than 75 years ahead, and to continue to bring that hope to people who oftentimes are in despair, to bring the kind of um, positive relationships between communities so that they can grow and prosper and lead healthy and productive lives. I wish CWS to continue to do that for the next decades and decades.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. And it is, when I listen to your stories, and well, we know each other for quite a number of years as well. There is a lot of gratitude, from me who is still working for CWS today, for everything that you have done, and actually everything that you are still doing. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, you're will always remain to be part of the CWS family. And thank you so much for your willingness to share some of those experiences with me today, and with the people who are going to listen to this podcast. Is there anything that you would like to elaborate on, that we have touched upon, to add something that you might have, hey, I did not finish my story, or I forgot something, or is this okay?
I think we're pretty good here. I obviously could go on and talk for hours, but that wouldn't be a good thing. I think it's better to keep what we've highlighted here. I must say I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my experiences and thoughts. I really do appreciate it. I think in retirement, at least for me,
Mhm.
I continue to look for ways in which I can repay or to bring back some usefulness to my own experience. I try to look for that, and so being a part of this podcast has been a very nice thing for me to be able to share, and I thank you for inviting me to do this.
Well, no, it's great to listen to you. And what I realize also is that listening to how you were explaining in terms of the 9/11 response that yes, we are making some progress, but then there are also some core genetic um, issues that continue to be relevant for our work ahead. And so it's yes, it's good to look forward, but it's also important to look back and to realize some amazing things were done. Much more needs to be done, but there are important things that we have learned from, and that should not be forgotten. So thank you so much. This was great.
Do you see you? Do you see me? Will you be the eyes so that we all can?
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you want to know more about Church World Service, please check out cwsglobal.org. Thank you.